Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, my name is Glenn Adamson. I'm the Curatorial Director for Design Miami in 2024. And it's a great pleasure to welcome you to our talks program. This is our first of a whole series that we'll be holding through the course of the week, all of which are loosely affiliated with the theme of the fair this year that I've chosen, which is blue sky. So the idea here is to pursue the question of optimism in the face of challenge and difficulty, the question of motivation, the question of imagination, and how we look to design as a way to carry ourselves into a better future. As I say, that's a somewhat loose affiliation for many of the talks, but in this inaugural talk, it is the topic. So what we've done is to bring together 5 amazing designers, international designers, who to us seemed like they really exemplified this principle of open, imaginative, spark-driven design. So in a moment, you'll hear from each of them. I will say that you are warmly encouraged to come to some of the other talks if you're here for the rest of the week. We have a great one coming up with Yves Bahar and the team at Rossanavi later on this afternoon, so please do come back for that. And also do be aware that all of the talks will be recorded and put out there online on the Design Miami website. So those that you might miss, you will have a chance to look at after the fact. So, without any further ado, what I'm first going to do is ask our designers, Christopher Kurtz, Dana Barnes, Karl Fritsch, Anna Karlin, and Nick Missel, to briefly introduce themselves. So folks, if you could just tell us where you are, a little bit about your background and what you have here at the fair, and where people can have a look at it, that would be great. So Chris, if you could go ahead and start.
Hey, thank you for coming. I'm Christopher Kurtz. I am coming from the Hudson Valley in New York State, about 2 hours north of New York City. And I am a sculptor who has found my way into the collectible design arena, and I work primarily in wood, and have created my home and studio there. And I've made a collaborative piece with Dana here. It's a wood and fiber joint piece that's at Sarah Myerscough Gallery, based out of London, and that piece is here on display right now.
By the way, Dustin, you can go ahead and start rolling the slides on the loop. We're going to have images of each of the designers just coming, sort of drifting past us as we speak. So thank you very much, Chris. Dana.
My name is Dana Barnes. I am living in New York City, from the South, but I live in New York City and have a studio on Forsyth Street on the Lower East Side, where I make all of my works. I primarily work with wool as a medium of choice. I like its raw, humble qualities, and contorting it into all sorts of odd abstractions that get ultimately wet bonded and fused. So that's what my work is. It's large scales, some of it. I also do objects. And I guess you'll see some slides of the work.
And important to say, Dana, that you have the collaborative piece at Sarah Myerscough, and you also have your work on view with R & Company.
That's right, I do. I have a piece at R & Company that is a very different type of work than what Christopher and I have done for the show.
Great, thanks, Dana. Okay, Karl Fritsch.
Kia ora koutou, grüß Gott, buenos dias, hello. I'm Karl Fritsch. I grew up in the Bavarian mountains, and for 15 years now I live in New Zealand. Thank you, Design Miami, for having me come all the way, and especially thank you to Ornamentum Gallery, who kind of are brave enough to show lots of little rings of mine in the context of this big fair. And yeah, thank you for coming.
And Karl, in case people in the back can't see your hat, I think it might bear some explanation.
Yeah, I actually quite like, even in my work, I like quite popular, things and change the message. So this came in quite handy, and with a bit of, nail polish, I think I could make it work for me.
So make again, folks. I hope you're selling those in an edition later on, maybe next year. Okay, Anna Karlin.
My name's Anna Karlin. I'm from London, but I live in New York, and my studio is downtown, and I work across all mediums, so furniture, lighting, objects, glass, ceramics, wood. I also make fine jewelry, so this kind of, my practice goes wherever I feel like it.
And you have your own booth.
And I have my own booth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a world unto itself. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it, it's absolutely an amazing place to enter. So Anna, thank you. Welcome. And finally, Nick Missel.
Hey, everybody. My name is Nick Missel. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri originally, and I currently live in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I show with Wexler Gallery. These guys are right here, and our gallery is right around the corner. The work that I have in the show right now, I don't really have like a specific like material or a way that I say like this is like a framework that I have to like stand by. Everything's always kind of evolving, and I don't know where it's going to go next. But currently I'm doing some fiberglass and like egg cart foam that's been sculpted and then reinforced with automotive paint, and then reclaimed automotive radiators, and then those pieces are sculpted, ground, and then polished, and then fused with resin to create new compositions. And we'll see where everything goes.
Okay, amazing. Before we dive into the main conversation, I did want to give Donna and Chris a chance to talk about their collaboration, because that's a little bit of an unusual project for both of them. So hopefully you've seen it, this amazing swing hanging from the ceiling at Sarah Meyerskoff Gallery. You'll see images flash by eventually as well. But before we plunge in, as I say, Chris, Dana, could you just explain how that project came about and what it was like to work together from such different media and create this synthetic object?
I'll go ahead and start. Dana and I we're both New York based, and there's an architect friend that we have in common named Michael Chen of MKCA Architecture. And Michael had been putting our work together in his projects for a couple of years, and he's just such a champion of the New York design scene of design build people. And he insisted that we meet one another and wanted to find a project for us to do together, looking for a client who could get on board with the idea of making something from two very different artists where we've never had that as an example to see. And we never found a client for that project, but Sarah Meyerskoff, my dealer in London, had expressed some interest in Dana, and I said, oh, I know her, and maybe there's an outlet for doing this project together. So we've been talking about it for Dana and I have been talking about this project for almost a decade. And then we've really been actively working on it for a little bit over a year.
Okay, so keep hope alive, that's the theme here. So Dana, then what happened when you actually struck up
Well, you know, it's so great. I was just speaking with someone. Oh, yeah. I was just speaking with Anna about Christopher picking up the phone and calling, and how great that is, because people generally email, and you know, it's a lot of detail to try to discuss and work out through an email of such an idea as this collaboration. So he called and really piqued my interest with this theme also that Sarah was going to be doing for her booth. And we immediately said, this is it. It's Design Miami, and let's make it happen. And from that point, it was just a matter of what wood is he using, what fibers am I using, how are we going to make it special and fabulous. We knew we wanted it to be suspended, but we didn't want just a chair. We wanted something more interesting. And the Rococo theme came about, and the way of thinking of strange, odd furniture pieces that could be interesting and meaningful.
Yeah, we knew we wanted it to be a two-seater, a place where people could gather.
Yeah.
It's a place where the two different kinds of practices can merge, so it's a collaboration in that way, but also a collaborative environment to put yourself in. And it seemed like with everything that's happening in the world, between anxieties around politics, climate, digital anxieties, that taking something back to a very analog way of making and creating a space to sort of just sit with that at this time and be together and listen as much as talking, which is what a lot of people are sort of asking for now in terms of understanding one another. And it just seemed to be a very hopeful thing too, because as you all know, working alone in a studio can be a wonderful sanctuary. It can be like the most beautiful space, but it can also be lonely, and it can kind of turn and have a different side to it when you're faced with the navel gazing, you know. So being able to collaborate, this is my first time collaborating on this level at all. I've always avoided it for one reason or another, but it created a very intimate sense of community in a way. I mean, she has a wonderful team of assistants, and so do I, and we all kind of merged together, and it felt like a really wonderful way to connect through making things together.
So you have a community of two on the making side and a community of two on the using side when people actually get in it.
Correct.
And it should be mentioned, by the way, that folks, you can actually get in the swing. So, in fact,
Gently.
being a museum person, it had not occurred to me to climb into the thing, which I will now do as soon as we're done here. But do give it a try. But it creates this very, as you say, intimate setting, even in the imagination. Yeah.
It's a tete-a-tete form, so it's like two shays facing one another. So you're facing the person you're sitting with and almost forced to kind of reach across the center and engage on a physical level too.
Yeah, maybe we'll have a marriage proposal before the fair is over. That would be good. Yeah. So this is a great segue to the main topic, and maybe Karl, I could start with you on this, which is the question of hope and optimism and how you understand that value within your practice. So in your case, you're actually engagement and marriage is an apt context for this question. You're working with the ring form especially, not exclusively, but it's a very important focus in your practice. And the ring is a promise. It's a kind of binding between two people often. It's a gift. So it has a lot of positive associations with it. And yet, often you're using this form, this typology in highly unexpected ways, deconstructing it, building on top of it, in a way considering it almost as a building site for yourself to occupy. So I'm curious to hear you talk both about optimism as a general force in your practice, and also specifically the symbol of the ring as a promissory object.
Oh, you said a lot already. I mean, I'm lucky I'm not a dentist. Usually when people buy want a ring, it's often a happy reason already, so that comes in quite handy. But I want to just come back to that. It has just actually a bit more to it, like with the make again. Like 8 years ago, I had a back injury, and it was very painful, and it stopped me from being able to make. And I got really depressed. It was a nightmare. And took a long time, and I needed a lot of help to go back in the workshop. And the workshop is my blue sky. It's my happy place. And so coming back to make again, I came back to it. It just became deeper. There's a bit more meaning to it, to the making. I mean, it's as simple as that. It's about making, but simple is not easy often. And I process my life. I process everything in my studio, and even it's blue sky. Even if it's cloudy, there's always a blue sky above it. So I manage, and I like that. The thing is with jewelry and rings, I can make them. They're mine. I try them all on, but the thing of a ring, it's an applied thing. It's only finished when it gets onto a person. It becomes a new life. It engages. It's finished when it connects. And that's a really interesting part of it. I don't often witness it because I'm working with dealers, but when I come, sometimes I go to a show and there's people coming with an interesting ring. I think, oh, that's interesting. And it takes me a while to realize it's actually my ring, because they take on a different life with a person, So, it's how those things take on a life, and yeah, just that's it.
Karl, when you started making again after the injury and you were able to get back into the studio, did you feel like there was any silver lining to having had the time away? Did it give you a new perspective on things?
Well, now I think it was a incredible, precious time actually, but that took a long time to see that pearl that was hidden in that. But as I say, things making had more meaning. It's a deeper meaning to it, It's I don't know if you get it. It's just like.
Well, that's one reason why I was thinking about your work as a kind of demolition of the ring, because it's almost like you're clearing away the cliche of the form and then building something new on top of it, which reminds me of the experience that you had actually of not being able to work and then reoccupying the studio.
Yeah, it's see, the making. It's like clearing that, even that head comes in very handy, because it's like a cliche. It's such a common thing that, you all know. I mean, even when I've been walking down the street, people look at me and then they look at me again. I like when it's quite ordinary, an ordinary thing, but you all know it. It's like the same thing with a ring. Pretty much everybody has a ring or knows rings, and then, it's almost, you don't pay attention to it, but then there's a slight change and you might have to look at it again and say, a ring is same as a hat, or you get all this jewelry here during design week. It all says something, it tells something. It's just like, okay, I'm an installer, I can stay past 8 o'clock, I can get a champagne down there. So, and a ring can have all those messages, and you can just use it to express yourself in a very, I don't know, like clothes in a fun way, or not even fun, can also be a very serious way, You can just say something.
Yeah, if I might editorialize for just a second, I think this is one of the things that makes me so interested in design as a field of operation, which is that it's not neutral. And of course, fine art isn't really neutral anyway, but it pretends to neutrality. The work of art, like what does work mean? It's like this placeholder word, right? A painting is this just pure rectangle. Sculpture can be anything it wants to be. Whereas a ring, a chair, a swing, a desk, a lamp, these things have specificity. They come loaded already and we respond, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Why I like the word applied art, because it applies itself. It needs, like a lamp. It finds its place. It's a chair. You use it, and probably. I don't mean that negative. That in design you can keep things a little bit more random, but in a good way. I feel like it has to be open for people to approach it. Whether I often think in fine art. I mean, I think a good ring is a good piece of art, but if we generalize in fine art, there's another consequence. Yeah. You cut that out. It is what it is for itself, and that. Right. And that doesn't allow actually, I make it, but can you move it a little bit, or can you make that ring a bit more? I'd like a bit more of a diamond. It's you don't have that conversation. Yeah. That's it. That's a statement.
Well, let me turn to Anna to talk about this a little further. So we've now gotten to this idea that perhaps the reason optimism means something in design is because it's applied to some frictional situation. So something's pushing back against you, the necessity of creating the light, whatever. What I'd love to hear about from you, Anna, if you're willing, is a little bit about the entrepreneurial side of being a designer, because every time I notice something you've done, which is often, it seems to me like you're becoming more and more ambitious. You're working in yet another medium. You're taking on some commission somewhere. You have a very expansive practice, and it seems to me that it's grown quite swiftly. And I wonder what it's been like for you to be inside that expanding machine and where the energy for that is coming from, how you use the friction that you encounter as a tool of generative, creative possibility. So could you talk a little bit about yourself, not just as a designer, but also as an entrepreneur?
So I think the way I see my studio is, firstly, it's such a privilege to be able to have a studio and do what you want. So the goal of the sort of commerce side of it is to keep making. So the reason I have a business, the reason I have a showroom, the reason I have the most incredible team ever, thank you to the team, is so that we can just do what we like. And there's an independence there, which is brilliant. So I see it as kind of like a Willy Wonka's factory of what I want to do that day. Do I want to figure out how to do something in glass that's going to take way too long and way too much money and be a terrible idea until it's a great idea? And you can keep going at it. And the work might take 4 years for something. So when we're launching a collection, press are always like, so, what's the theme behind this collection? There is no theme. It's an ongoing conversation. And I kind of launch pieces when essentially I do need to down tools for a second to make some money back. And so, but the collection could all be launched at any point, and the works respond to each other. So in terms of the friction of design, the way a collection is built is that one piece responds to another, which begets another, which begets another. So if there's a kind of more traditional sort of tapestry that we're using as a headboard, well, I think that's not, just that world is one note. So in that world, I now need a very contemporary lamp next to it. And then the lamp builds itself and then responds. So I think it's a very internal conversation that I'm having in my own head that then kind of makes it into a commercial practice because we sell it in the end. But the joy is in the design and the making, and then I feel very grateful to sell it. Keep going.
That's very interesting because I can say, as from a critical point of view, working as a critic, one thing I've noticed is that the longer duration and the shape of a designer's practice tells you a lot about their intention. So I think about like Faye Toogood and the way she works in the concept of an assemblage, which is almost like a fashion collection, or the way that Lindsay Edelman will work in these long series, for example, with variations to designers I might compare to you in certain ways. And it sounds to me like your strategy is much more fluid and sort of additive in a way. And I'm particularly curious about your decision to work on all of these different disciplines and materials, because surely that's making your life more difficult in some ways.
I've never thought not to. I think because I'm self-taught, I didn't know anything going into it. Blessing. Because what's to stop you? Nothing, you're just figuring it out and expressing and building on it. So I never saw why not. I still don't see why not. I love it. It has to come from a place of passion, or else you just wouldn't bother. So.
Right. And how do you balance the eternal question of internal motivation and intention as opposed to externally applied expectation?
Ignore the external.
That's such a Design Miami answer. I love that. You don't hear that at ICFF, folks. But in practice, how do you get away with that? Because you're doing commissions and site-specific projects all the time, no?
Yeah, but they're coming to you already for something you have. It's a lovely, energetic exchange. Like someone coming to your studio, they want to be there. They're coming to be nice. And then you have an exchange and you make something, hopefully, beautiful together. And it's a fair exchange. I give my labor and my designs, and they're the ones commissioning you, and it's a fair exchange.
Yeah. So one more question about that, and this may be a more provocative question. I'm wondering about how your own identity or persona figures into that, because that implies that to initiate that exchange, you already need to be Anna Karlin, this kind of known quantity that represents a certain set of values, a certain set of aesthetic principles. But that's also about you as well as the objects you're putting into the world, no? So how do you think about yourself as a character in the drama of your own work?
I don't think my ego is big enough. I think the work and me are one and the same. So I don't really see a separation. You know, like when you have a child, the child doesn't realize it's separate from you until they're really quite old. And I feel the same about the work. It's me and the work are one and the same. And if a person can evolve, the work can evolve. Life is long, and we'll keep going on this journey together.
Okay. All right, so boundaryless approach. Yeah, nice. Okay. We might get back to your child in a moment, but
no need.
but now I want to turn to Nick Missel. So Nick, would love to hear you talk about optimism as well. Your own trajectory is very interesting because you didn't really train as a designer and you found yourself in the space relatively recently compared to, I think, everyone else on the stage. But also, I wanted to ask you about the nature of the objects you're making, which seem quite hard-won, and also they have this industrial kind of shrapnel buried in them, and that turns into this very beautiful kind of filigree on the surface. And if you haven't seen the works there at Wexler Galleries, are right out here, and do have a very close look at them because they're extremely compelling on a detail level, but also the overall forms seem quite, I don't want to say tormented, but there's a kind of lot of volatility in the forms. They seem like they've been through a lot, and they bespeak a kind of longer history than they actually have, I might say. So how do you think about your own trajectory, and then how does that influence the works as this expression of possibility?
So I think in terms of, oh wow, that's odd. In terms of my own trajectory, I started off doing sculpture, and that was my undergrad, my master's. I moved to New York, and I was doing sculpture for 5 years there. And then I had an opportunity, and it was funny, I actually was working with designers because I wanted separation between the art world and design because I wanted to kind of carve my own path. Funnily enough, I was influenced, and now here I am. But yeah, I had a moment where I had an opportunity to make a piece where I considered it sculpture. It was one of those things where I was walking around the city and I noticed, I was like, oh, bales of cardboard everywhere. And I just think it kind of like, so going back to what you're talking about of like kind of like the torment of the object, I think kind of like in everyday life, we're thinking about, like we go through a lot and we're human, and I'm trying to figure out how do I embed like what it means to be human in the work. And I think we like have a facade of like who we want to present ourselves as, like we always want to be happy and perfect, but that's not human. And I think something that like when I'm attracted to something, kind of like a bale of cardboard or a bale of aluminum radiators, and just seeing like how it's totally discarded and then like collapsing, I don't know, it just feels powerful. I think there's something about like kind of like the magical realism of like what the materials are, where you're like, what is this? Like, what is it doing? And it just kind of speaks to me, and it feels like that is some form of a representation of like my life and what I've done, and just doing extremely hard labor like throughout my entire life and trying to figure out how can I put myself in an object. So
can I just ask,
yeah.
Nick, I don't know much about your background, but
yeah.
do you come from like a family background or a Midwestern scenario that was not that art influenced and was more working class, more kind of involved in?
Yeah, more working class. I grew up with my grandfather, and he was a pattern maker. So when I was young, I would go to the foundry, and like we had a wood shop in the basement. And the funny moments of like right now, you're like, why would you put a child on a lathe? And I'm 6 years old, just in the basement by myself, no safety gear, and so that was
on a metal lathe.
Oh God, no.
A wood lathe. Okay.
Yeah, a wood lathe.
Okay.
I was making candlesticks.
Right. Okay. But so that was that was present for you since you remember that kind of culture of making and almost like a blue collar ethic of production, manufacture, and knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that's what, like, having that as a background and like a general influence, that's what kind of led me into like looking at industry, and that's where some of the forms that I'm interested in, like kind of just trying to find the opportunity. It's like, oh, this is like egg cart foam. It's a beautiful form, but it's also like meant to be totally like not seen. It's utilitarian, very like everybody can have it kind of thing. Yeah. And I like how it's like that can resonate with everyone in a way that's not it's not overly specific, but like meaningful, and just moments like that. So like everything kind of like for me, if I get stuck, maybe I'm reading a book and that'll spark an idea, or maybe I just start thinking about like my past and the memories that like I've had, and figure out like how can I put more of myself into the work so that someone can get a part of me.
Right. So there's a kind of availability or universality to the work in that sense.
I think at the core, I think maybe the output is a little a little different.
Right, because in fact, for most people to encounter a seat or a desk like that is quite a surprising experience, especially if they're not here. Design Miami,
Exactly.
They're quite avant-garde objects as well. So, by the way, you're going to hear me say this all week probably, but I always call it the design avant-garde. I don't call it collectible design, because to me the whole point is to clear new space in the culture, which is what the avant-garde is all about. And for me, there's actually more avant-garde energy on the design side of the street than there is over there on the art side of the street. Maybe that's a conversation we could have. But it's quite relevant to what I wanted to ask you next, Nick, which is about the question of using found objects and found materiality. So this is a very familiar concept in art, which goes, I guess, back to Duchamp, but through many other people, Rauschenberg, Jessica Stockholder, all sorts of amazing people. And the concept here would be that there's a kind of latent value or potency in these neglected things that are lying around us, especially if you're actually kind of recovering trash or discarded materials, as you often do. And I guess the question that I would have for you is, what does it mean to be doing that in design that it might not mean in sculpture? Because in sculpture, it's obviously a symbolic act to take a piece of valueless rubbish and turn it into something of aesthetic interest. But then when you're actually making that into an object that you can sit at all day and serves a function, you're taking this formerly functional stuff and turning it into something that's newly functional, maybe. And I wonder how you think about that, and particularly because you have had a sculptural background and now you're working in functional design, what that means for you.
So honestly, I don't really think, so I like the parameters of the design world. Like the lack of parameters in sculpture, I always found too broad, and I always loved making furniture objects. And I think I just think about them as sculptures still. So I don't really think about that, I guess.
Okay.
So, but I think honestly everything you said in regards to like the materiality and like having some kind of like material resonance and like in our culture, like that's really important to me in the work. And even like thinking about like with the bales specifically, like I was looking at them and like in my head I was like, oh, this is an amazing thing. It's like these are like compressed moments of like all these different people, or like maybe like a store, and like each bale has like its own unique like feeling based on the products that we buy, and like we are defined by like the waste that we have.
Right.
In some form. Not all waste is valuable for like what I'm doing, but
I suppose also the transformation, the material transformation is so extreme that a viewer or user might not actually know what they're dealing with. It took Lewis explaining to me what was in those objects for me to realize there was this kind of automotive component in the resin and how you were doing it. So it's quite mysterious at the first encounter, and I wonder how important that is to you, that magical quality of unfamiliarity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's kind of the core, because I think it's like you're taking something that has been discarded, that is no longer like valuable, and like you're trying to bring life back into it. And so if I were to just maybe like place a couple pieces together and not like, I think like the polishing for the aluminum, for instance, if I didn't do that, it wouldn't kind of like bring it into a different like realm.
Right.
And so I think that's more of how I think about it, I guess.
Okay,
So
I'd like to shift the conversation now, coming back to Team Dana and Chris initially, and talk about the bigger picture. And you had already mentioned the question of the political. You've got your red hat on, Karl. You're now talking about, Karl, questions of democracy, basically, kind of big D democracy. So what does it mean for people to be involved in design from a number of perspectives? And I wonder how you're all feeling right now, and whatever it means to you, like climate change, American politics, global politics, the tragedies that we're seeing on our screen. What I will say that when I chose the theme, it was, in the spring, so we didn't know how the election would turn out. And one of the things I was thinking was that we needed a theme that would work either way and feel relevant in December, no matter what had happened in November, which hopefully is the case, at least as far as the fair goes. So there's obviously a lot of ways this conversation could go, but I wonder if you would each be willing to speak from a personal point of view about how optimistic you feel as a person, the optimism that you do have, where you're getting it, and then also how does that inform your work and how does it correlate to your creative practice or not? So Chris, would you mind starting with that?
Sure. I think maybe on, we can talk about this on any level, from like how our artistic careers have taken off all the way to like current events, right?
Right.
I think one of the images I started with is a picture of a Windsor chair, the double Windsor chair, which I've moved on, I think, from that kind of artistic language, but it's still extremely important to me because I made that piece in 2004, which was 1 year before the first Design Miami.
Oh, yeah.
So that's 20 years ago. And I don't know if you remember seeing that image, but there's a Windsor chair that I had made after graduating with a bachelor's degree in sculpture, trying to figure out how to make money. And I started making furniture, reproduction furniture, to make money. And I just felt such like opposite of everything that all the education I had just had. But I still was attracted to both things. And there was craft, design, antique, sort of collectability in that piece, as well as straight up sculpture. And I was trying to figure out how I fit into the larger conversation in the art world, because my art education was sort of post-studio. I went to work for Martin Purrier after college, who's sort of a master at making handmade things but relevant to a larger cultural conversation. And I was just really lost. And what's optimistic at this point for me is, in 2004, the only thing I had to look at was maybe Murray Moss. There was no Friedman Benda, Sarah Meyerskoff Art Company. It was that, which was kind of unique and exceptional. But their design was Philippe Starck and Jasper Morrison. Like, that's what I thought being a designer was, sort of like being a part of a bigger design house, like a Herman Miller or something. Right. And this idea of kind of creating a new genre, where I'm really happy to hear you say that you want to sort of distance collectible design and talk about avant-garde, because I do feel like there's more fresh soil to turn over in this arena of the art world than next door. And we've always been the sort of the distant cousin of the art world. Right. But I think that to be a practitioner in this part of the art world, whatever you want to call this at this point, is very exciting, and it's new. The market is kind of new, and I've been very lucky that my career has matured at the same time, at least in this country, that has made sense to museums, galleries, collectors, fairs like this. Yeah. So it just feels like we're at the beginning of something, even though this has been around for a while. We've all known that, but I feel a little bit like the conversation of wondering, maybe in the 50s, is photography art. People don't talk about that anymore. No. We just accept it. And already, thank goodness, people are done talking about blurring the lines between design and art. I mean, that still enters the conversation, but less so, because that ship has sailed, and this is a firmly established way of working, and it's exciting to be sort of at what feels like it beginning to gain traction. Yeah,
I would even say that what's even more exciting is that it's not the beginning, but there's a state of maturation and kind of sophistication.
Right. No, this is like with the Objects USA is sort of a case in point that this has been happening for a while, but having it be more mainstream or getting bigger sort of attention.
That relates to the other part of the question, though, which is about what you and the field can do in relation to current events. And I want, because, just to frame the critique, I suppose, for a moment, I think a lot of people would say that Design Miami occupies a fairly rarefied and possibly even an elite position in the broader culture. Obviously, most people can't afford the things that are on the floor here. So how do you think of the discipline, however you conceive it, as interacting with the larger context of our current fractious political and cultural climate?
The collector base is very small, but the reach through social media or publications or museum shows is very broad.
Right.
And where I think, if you're walking through Tribeca or Chelsea and looking at the blue chip art galleries, the layman off the street might just say, that's not for me, I don't understand it, and the walls go up because there is that sort of I don't know, have you guys seen this? I'm kind of obsessed with this reel that's circulating on Instagram of Richard Serra sort of berating Charlie Rose about what is art and what is not art. Has anybody seen that? And he's very draconian, architecture is not art, furniture is not art. What's next? Is a tree going to be art or something? And so it seems so antiquated now to hear even Richard Serra, who I admire very much, looking very out of touch in that way. And so I think everyone can understand what a chair is, a cabinet, a lamp, and so already it's an entry point. And then you can talk about more difficult things with that as a tool. So I think that, yes, this is an exclusive, rarefied air here, but its message is more broad-reaching, and I think that through furniture or things that we have a relationship with already, it's you already have a foot in the door for talking about things that are a little bit more difficult and challenging.
It reminds me of something that Peter Coyote said. I don't know if you know who he is. He was one of the Diggers. So he was a big figure in the West Coast counterculture, basically card-carrying hippie. And he later became the voice of Ken Burns' documentaries, by the way. But he was talking about his experience in the counterculture, and he said that if you looked at it brutally, politically, the counterculture was an absolute failure. I mean, Nixon came in, eventually you had Reagan, and so he said that was a calamity. But if you look at the cultural side, the way he put it is that we won everything, right? Because the values that were animating the counterculture became almost unquestioned in so many areas of American life. And I wonder whether the kind of soft power of design works similarly, and the subculture or counterculture of the design avant-garde might function in that way. That's quite interesting. Dana, how would you think about this question of the political and cultural climate for your work and your practice? How do you get your optimism, and how are you feeling?
Well, I, like Chris, years ago started at ICFF with a collection that was more like home furnishings, these giant loop squares and poofs and things like this, and just thought, wasn't sure where this was going to go, but have let my clients kind of lead me. I do a lot of direct commissions, and they have brought me optimism about what is possible, what can be done within my use of my material that is kind of rare use of it. So I think that, I see the optimism in my coming to the studio every day, feeling the responsibility to carry on. Artists are always expressive, emotional, and have a message, and if we can deliver that through our art, even if it's making a massive floor piece that is cozy and brings comfort in the home and is a happy place. I have a client that after the pandemic, or during the pandemic, sent me images of a chair that was similar to our tete-a-tete, but it was a swing chair. And her daughter was 10 years old, and she would sit crosswise in the chair, and that was where she would do all of her homework, because of course everyone was at home, they couldn't go to school, and that was her happy place. And she said she would even take some of her Zoom classes in the swing, so that gave me great comfort, knowing that I had created this happy place and place of calm and comfort. So I think that, it would be nice, it's nice to make a difference that way, and hope for, in terms of political concerns, I am working actually to keep craft alive with a beautiful project in India now with it's a women's empowerment center that it's in the Thar Desert, and it's a school that was built, and the young children bring their moms to the empowerment center, which is not yet built, but on its way. And so this way they can create their crafts. They don't have to go to the city, and it's about gender equality. They are trying to sell these pieces within the center, and the money goes back to the community. Mm-hmm. So I'm working on that project to make a difference with societal concerns. And it's a beautiful project, and the kids are, we've managed to get buses donated to go out into the desert to bring the kids in. So it's projects like that that I'd love to do more of, work more with, to make a difference with what I do in my art.
Right. I think also that idea of a happy place, I mean, it's obviously a cliche, but it's quite profound, actually. If you can make a place where somebody is happy.
Yeah.
And the idea of design is drawing a kind of charmed circle around itself where whatever the disturbing events of the day might be, you can retreat inside that space and actually recover, and then build up energy to go out and have positivity. And design does that very, very effectively, in fact.
Very effectively, yeah.
Yeah.
They're sanctuary, they're
sanctuary,
solace.
exactly.
Yeah. Place of solace, so.
Yeah. I do want to take a few questions, but before we do that, I just want to ask the rest of you for a brief comment on the question of optimism in politics. Karl, anything you would want to say about that?
It's quite, as a jewelry maker, I can let my rings say lots of things and can let them have attitude. But just like a week ago, I went actually on a march because the new government decided to change kind of the Treaty of Waitangi interpretation, which takes away power from the indigenous Maori people. So sometimes it's better you go marching than just wear a brooch. I recommend, but yeah.
We could do both at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. Anna, you just had a child. How old is she? 6 weeks?
6 weeks.
Yeah, amazing. Congratulations. So that's the most optimistic of all acts.
Or selfish, either way. No, I think for me, I think in some ways it's a lofty ideal, and in some ways it's completely basic. And I think it's something we haven't mentioned is beauty. And I think that's something we all respond to, or else we wouldn't be in this room. And just the act of making something beautiful and creating beauty in this world is an age-old practice that keeps you hopeful, keeps you happy. It does make a difference. And yes, we're in this rarefied environment, but actually I think it's how you choose to look at things, not necessarily what you make. And that is something that I think you can not teach kids, but sort of cultivate. So it's not what you look at, it's how you look at. And that for me is the most important thing. And then the work is a result of that.
Yeah, amen. And in fact, if you look back across the deep span of history, of course, art and design is the thing that always wins, right? Like when we look at Renaissance Florence or ancient China or ancient American context, all we see is the art and design. All the political conflict has faded away, and we have the paintings, we have the furniture, we have the buildings, right? So we're playing the long game. That would be one way of thinking about it. Nick, anything you'd want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I'm thinking about politics and optimism, I think it's really more of like when things are rough, that's when people really need to come together the most. And I feel like that always ends up happening. And I always kind of thought, or at least I hope that the work will eventually, or is doing this, is that just being able to be around it can provoke, more thoughtful conversations that will kind of maybe help people think about the world differently. So that's kind of really like one of the core goals of you want it to connect, you want it to be impactful, and you want to be able to have something that sparks imagination. So I mean, yeah, optimism is sometimes tough, but we got to keep going. I mean, the act of making, it's like if we weren't making anything, how could you be optimistic? So
yeah. That's also the blue sky thing for me as well. It's the sky is over us all, right? So, Karl, were you going to say something? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just in the context of, there was a stage I decided to make a living from what I do. So coming back to design, it's an art fair. It's about selling what we're doing. And, I want to keep living from what I'm doing. So that's a big part of why I'm here. And that's why this is a good occasion.
Yeah, absolutely.
and there's an optimism if this is busy and you're interested and excited and, take something away from it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to Nick's point about togetherness, I guess maybe at Art Basel they feel like there's a sense of community and togetherness. I mean, there's 240 galleries over there, so I don't quite know how that works, but I don't want to assume anything. But certainly I know at Design Miami, there's this feeling that, a lot of the galleries have been showing here for 20 years, and they had, before that they were at flea markets, in New York City. And so there's an incredible sense of history and camaraderie here, and obviously all of you being here to listen to us is a big part of that. So, yeah.
Could you indulge me to interject something?
Of course, yeah.
It's a little bit of a personal thing that I'm really enjoying right now, but Nick and I go way back, even though I'm much older than he is, but I'm from Kansas City, Missouri. He's from St. Louis. We both went to the, Nick, is it okay if I'm...
Oh, please.
We both went to the Kansas City Art Institute, where my father was a professor.
Oh.
So I went through that program. Nick was one of my dad's students. And then I kind of came in to do a visiting artist talk at some point, much longer after I graduated. And I became a little bit of an informal advisor for you for a minute, right? Would you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've always looked up to you.
And then we've kept in contact, and I remember him trying to pick a graduate school, and then when he started getting into design, he felt a little bit uncomfortable about the identity and figuring that out, which I had gone through. So, yeah. But another thing of optimism is that kind of community. I have this amazing collaborator here we've gone back to, and Nick and I have come full circle to be on this stage with you guys. It's just really satisfying to see the sort of the seeds of teaching, and my father taught there for 45 years, and I see his students everywhere, and just being on the stage together is really special, especially when things are tough.
What was your father's name?
Karl Kurtz.
Karl Kurtz. Yeah. Okay, here's to Karl Kurtz. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Thanks for letting me.
It's great to have you
share
on
that.
Our anchors on either side of the panel. That's amazing. Okay, I think we have a few minutes for questions. So my extremely capable colleague, Dustin Peters, who's helped put this talks program together with me, has the mic and will come to you. So just raise your hand, but do wait for the microphone before asking. And I think we do have the camera on, so do be aware that you will be filmed when you're asking the question too. If nobody has a question, I'm going to call in Ed Hogekian.
Glenn, I've got one for you to start
Dustin,
us off.
Yeah, go for it, yeah.
I'm going to flip the question you asked last back on you, so you've got a shot at answering it as well. Where's your optimism coming from right now?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, as I just said, I feel like being principally a historian, I do feel like taking the long view comes quite naturally to me. And so all of those ideas I was mentioning about art and design feeling marginal at the time, and sometimes being forcibly marginalized at the time, and yet gradually overcoming those forces and becoming not just central but definitive of culture. That feels like a really important source of optimism. And I think what I would say beyond that is that there's a kind of diversity of expression and participation in every sense of the word diversity, which could be construed as ethnic or in terms of gender or geography, or here at Design Miami, I think the most powerful aspect of it is simply the question of genre and what's possible to do. And I think that in the future, I just wrote a book called A Century of Tomorrows, which I'm launching here at the fair on Thursday. So come on back on Thursday evening for that. But it's a history about predicting the future in the 20th century. And what strikes me is that in 50 years, let's say, I'm pretty convinced that people will look back at our moment and think we got a lot of things wrong, especially on climate, but that also this was a period of remarkable liberation in many, many dimensions simultaneously, and that there might actually weirdly be a lot of nostalgia for the kind of energetic release that we have now, especially in design, but not only, that's comparable only to perhaps what happened with modernism in the 1920s and 30s. So I think 100 years ago, they had that kind of episode, and I actually think we're going through something quite like that now, which is, again, a reason why I think the design avant-garde is such a powerful idea. So, but I'm supposed to be the moderator, not answering the question. So, okay, other questions? Ed, do you have a question? You must have a question, Ed. You always have a good question.
Thanks. I was curious, obviously the fair is a great forum to be meeting new people, potentially be gaining new clients, and I don't know how many other fairs you may be involved with during the course of the year, but I was curious, outside of the fairs, what's the way that you find you're establishing relationships with clients or finding new clients? Because that's, it's a challenge, but that's part of, the necessity of life. And so I was just curious, outside of fairs, how do you go about cultivating relationships with clients?
Anna, do you mind taking that first, because you're such a ninja at it?
Press. We've been really lucky with press. So press is how we sort of, anyone knew I existed at all. And then I'm just endlessly grateful that people turn up to my Chinatown studio, and we have a storefront, by appointment only showroom, where we've created a world. And it was the biggest risk I took business-wise. I was in a loft space and we were really outgrowing it, and it was chaos. And people would come to buy these very expensive pieces in an incredibly chaotic environment. And I thought, okay, we're busting at the seams. Next steps. We saw this derelict shop front. My team were like, we should rent that. I was like, we could never afford that in a million years. I went in, and the landlady was sitting at a plastic table in a derelict space, happened to be there, and we got chatting, and in the end, we took it, renovated the whole thing. It was a huge risk for me, a massive undertaking, and it really paid off. And now we have this little world, and we host in it, and I built a full kitchen so that we could host dinners and have people, because you can't do it in an apartment because you live in New York, so you live in a shoebox, and that's rubbish. So I do it in my studio. And created a little world. And I think, but being here is a big part of, okay, that's great, but 0.01% of people that buy my work ever see it. We're in Chinatown in New York, so I'd love to be here and see what happens. So about to find out.
Karl, did you want to say?
Yeah, I really just like making things. So, and I think it's a different profession selling things. Like for me, I'm not good at it. Some dealers, they send me away when I'm at the booth, and I try to avoid it. But it's an interesting question, because there's no rules about it. You have to find out what you're good at and how you can make it work. And luckily, I just like making, and I can provide the gallery with work, and then they take it on from there. So, that's kind of my way.
I like that. That's a great point. There's no rules on the design side, but even more, there's no rules on the marketing side, and everybody has their own individual pathway with that. Can we take one last question, or no? Yeah. One very quick question with a quick answer, if there is one. Okay, that's great because Dustin doesn't want me to let you do that anyway. So, okay, so please join me in thanking our fantastic panel. Thank you, guys.